Once again, it was family that led me into temptation. Some distant cousins I hardly knew. Second or third, maybe, but cousins all the same. I was in a low point in my mood at that time, being at the end of my weed smoking cycle. This meant I had spent months slowly ramping up my smoking and was now at the stage where I was smoking about an eighth daily, which came out to about $50 per day if I paid retail, even $60 sometimes. It got expensive very fast and was hard on the lungs. And I wasn't really even getting high, except for with my first couple bowls first thing in the morning, despite smoking pretty much hourly throughout the rest of the day. I had made a trip to Colorado a while previous and bought a good amount to justify the drive, thinking somehow that this time I was going to be able to control myself. I really went in believing it this time, despite all evidence to the contrary. I even managed to make it all the way to Colorado and back without touching any of it. 24 hours it took me. It was a 10-hour drive each way, and then I spent a couple hours in Denver driving around buying shit. I had intended to stay with an old college friend who had been flirting with me a lot online. I was expecting at least some cuddling and probably more. What I got was an unrelenting finger that seemed to only have eyes for my asshole. She was already pretty drunk when I got there, and we had a few more drinks which put her on the far side of the sweet spot. Once we started making out, she was constantly trying to stick a finger in my ass, which I'm just not into. Maybe if I had just showered and she was really into it, I'd give up my rosebud for some sweet little thing. But after 10 hours in the car and about 15 cups of coffee, I didn't want any fingers in there. I fended her off and eventually told her I needed to go to sleep. I was exhausted. I was awakened about a half hour later by her pulling my sweats off, I assume intent on taking another poke at me. I decided I wasn't going to get any sleep, packed my bag, and hit the road. 10 hours later, I was back home. I had driven 20 hours and 24, and that extra 4 had been spent mostly driving around Denver or waiting in line at weed shops, plus about an hour and a half with Little Miss Stink Thumb. I shouldn't make fun. For anyone who's into that, more power to you. Maybe just make sure both parties are into it first. I was staying with a couple cousins in northwest Iowa at the time, after having kind of a blow-up with my parents. I'd been working as a security guard at the hospital where my mom worked. She had got me the job, pulled a few strings, etc. Then I failed a drug test and got fired. I was already short on cash and ended up having to move back in with my parents. They were pissed about the job but said I could stay there if I stopped smoking. This way they could keep an eye on me. So I snuck outside to smoke. Used eye drops and breath mints. Only smoke when I knew I'd have a little time to air out before being around anyone. I think they may have been suspicious, and a few times they asked me if I was high when I definitely was high. Of course I denied it, but it wasn't a coincidence. I must have been acting stupid or whatever. So then one of those nosy neighbors saw me outside smoking a bowl. She told my parents, hence the blow-up. I had to move out or start drug counseling. I knew I had it coming, but I was still in a state of need and not ready to tackle withdrawal and the inevitable depression that would follow. So I moved out, drove 10 hours to the middle of nowhere in northwest Iowa to an old farmhouse that my aunt owned. I had a ton of good memories in the house from being a little kid at family functions, so it was a good fit for me. It also helped that my cousins Spence and Darren, who were living in the house at the time, were both regular weed smokers. All the same, I was in rough shape emotionally and psychologically and smoking like a chimney, morning, noon, and night. I knew I was going to have to bite the bullet at some point soon, if only because I was going to run out of money. As always, there was a damaged woman I had given my heart to, and she had returned it in rough shape. I guess I shouldn't be surprised when a scorpion stings. It's in its nature, after all. I had a lyric that sums up my state of mind at that time pretty well. My spine is the suspension bridge condemned about to crack. My heart is the hood ornament on Aphrodite's Cadillac. My eyes are melted snowmen, puddles in the mud. My mind a mercenary shark in a bathtub of blood. To be depressed is to live in a depressing world. That line about the melted snowmen kind of captures that idea. Because when I think of snowmen, I think of kids full of hope and joy. I think of snow days and hot cocoa. I think lots of good shit. But like all things, snowmen suffer a merciless death. That muddy puddle is the death of all that goodness. To have your perspective passing through such a murky lens means that you leave every interaction wondering if that person is upset with you, wondering what you did. You only see negative outcomes for future scenarios. Can't possibly imagine anything working out. It doesn't matter how logical you try to be. Your brain is broken, and that makes reality broken. Because reality is perception, after all. Or something like that. But when the world is so drenched in shit, you feel crushed. You want to lash out, thrash around, do damage, like a shark in a bathtub of blood. Imagine the shark there, slowly dying, thrashing, chewing at whatever is within jaw's reach. That was my psyche. So I was in a seriously fucked state, and on this occasion I actually had a decent reason to be. Meaning it wasn't just fucked up brain chemistry, but my life kind of being in the shitter. So when I came downstairs one night and found Darren and Spence plotting an armed robbery with their brother, I wanted in. I remember they were cooking frozen pizzas, which counted as pretty fine eating in that household of ramen and bologna sandwiches. They didn't try to hide what they were planning, and since I couldn't help it over here, I asked to be involved. In fact, I begged to be involved. I needed the money, and I knew how to handle a gun, was good under pressure, etc. They finally relented on the condition that I not be high. I told them I'd probably be more calm and chill if I was high, since I had been smoking so regularly. My body had basically come to rely on it just to stay evened out. They could see the wisdom in this, and eventually came around. Spence and Darren were interesting characters. They were both farmers and both into video games, but Spence also enjoyed duck hunting, playing guitar, and golfing. Darren didn't really have any hobbies besides gaming and getting high. He lived off of Red Bull and cigarettes and would sometimes inadvertently fast all weekend without even realizing it. His brother usually brought him some kind of dinner, a frozen burrito or Hot Pocket or something, that Darren would take a bite of and then set on top of the many empty Red Bull cans that crowded his gaming table. He was locked in a serious way. On more than one occasion, he woke me up in the middle of the night screaming at some dude who had just killed him in Fortnite or Call of Duty. They had a couple of other brothers, Colin and Aston, who didn't stay with us but lived in the area. Aston was the oldest and was kind of the leader of the group. At least on this night he was. He was an interesting character, in that he was a flight attendant and about the gayest guy you'll ever meet. Imagine a young Truman Capote, very slight and unassuming in his posture and presence, very graceful and effeminate, elegant even. But he just also happened to be a shotgun enthusiast. He wasn't rich by any means, but he made decent money and lived pretty cheaply, so his number one hobby was collecting and firing guns, particularly shotguns. He collected mainly 12 gauges and had every manner of ammunition imaginable for them. He had rounds that made your shotgun shoot a flamethrower blast of fire, incendiary armor-piercing rounds, flashbang rounds, non-lethal beanbag rounds, and flare rounds. He had rounds packed with rock salt, flechettes, and all manner of BBs and ball bearings. He even had rounds packed with confetti. His shotguns ranged from a $20,000 antique duck hunter with all sorts of beautiful engravings to a fully automatic tactical shotgun that he had built himself. He even had a pistol called the Judge, which fired a 410 caliber shotgun round. That thing really kicked. His passion for collecting shotguns was rivaled only by his passion for shooting them. He'd acquired his first gun at age 10, a 410 single-shot break-open model. He'd bought it with money he'd earned walking beans and quickly learned to fire it with deadly accuracy. He also had a pretty neat trick that essentially turned a single shot into two. He'd hold one shell in his lips with the business end facing outwards, so that after he fired his first shot, he could crack the barrel lightning quick, which would expel the spent shell, and then in one smooth motion he'd bring the gun up to his mouth and essentially spit the second shell into the chamber. He'd snap it shut and be ready to fire again in an instant. He drilled this technique for hours on end until he could fire off 2 shots about as quickly as your average hunter could squeeze 2 off running a pump action. He discovered biathlon on television one day and soon was pushing himself to the limits of endurance to force himself to shoot tired or out of breath. He jogged through the fields, shotgun in his hands, until he scared up a pheasant, at which point he'd plant his feet and fire. When this became easy, he started setting challenges for himself. He decided he needed to spin around one time before firing, or do a somersault, or some other ridiculous challenge to give the bird a fighting chance against his deadly technique. He learned to shoot left-handed. He even tried to master shooting while running, though this was much harder than one might expect. When he reached high school age, he became a drum major, which introduced a whole new set of tricks into his arsenal. He practiced twirling his shotgun about 3 times as much as he twirled his baton. Unfortunately, the teacher in charge wouldn't let him carry a gun on the field during games. But he could do things with a shotgun you wouldn't believe. He was like an action hero, an extremely gay action hero. He knew about 1 billion people being in the job he was in, and a lot of them were pretty young things who liked to party. And since it was the kind of job conducive to work hard, play hard, some of these young women got mixed up with some rather unsavory characters. One of the women came back with a really horrific story of having been raped by a meth dealer. Apparently he had tried to woo her by showing her his stash and getting her super high and then showing her this card table that just had piles of money on top of it. It was just one of those cheap fold-out card tables in an empty bedroom, but it was completely covered with neat stacks of bills, ranging in denomination from 1 to 20, going up almost a couple feet high in a couple of cases. It was a lot of money, and she was impressed, but she didn't want to sleep with the guy. Wouldn't have mattered if he'd been a supermodel with a 10-inch cock and an addiction to performing oral. She wasn't feeling it, and in fact didn't want to be touched at all. And so when this guy kept making moves on her, she finally lost it and told him to back off in no uncertain terms. That was when he got really mad and stopped with the whole wooing routine, instead moving on to violently raping her, beating her up, choking her, yelling at her the whole time. Told her he was going to kill her for being such a dumb bitch. Ashton heard about all this secondhand, of course, but he did hear about it because the woman was taken out of work rotation while her black eyes reduced to a size that would be manageable with makeup. She decided she wouldn't be reporting since she had been extremely fucked up when the whole thing happened and was worried she might lose her job if all that had come out. But Ashton immediately told her that if she would just give him the address, he would take care of it. She was definitely down with this guy getting his comeuppance, going so far as to drive by the place with Ashton and point it out. The house was out in the country, and the nearest neighbors were a half a mile away. Ashton had drilled her for information and found out there was a front and back door and that the room with the money in it, as well as the room she had been raped in, were upstairs. So if we were going to do this thing, we were going to have to bust in the front door, which opened directly into the front room, which was most likely where whoever was in the house would be. The times that she had been over there, everyone had been chilling out in the front room since the kitchen was right there. Sometimes they had guns on them, sometimes they didn't. The plan was to kick in the front door more or less and to get the drop on all of them, and if we were lucky, we'd catch the guy alone and hopefully not have to kill anybody or even fire our guns in anger. But we were definitely going in with our biggest guns and our most lethal rounds in case the lead did start to fly. Darren and Spence were going to follow Ashton in the front door. Spence had an AR that he had wanted to bring, but Ashton had insisted that this was a job for shotguns and he had just the guns for the job. A pair of home defense shotguns that he'd bought on sale, as well as a sawed-off pump and several high-quality duck hunter pumps, besides his crown jewel, the fully automatic he'd pieced together himself. I was going to be coming in the back door with Colton with a 12-gauge pump. Colton was carrying the same thing. There was a guy you wouldn't expect to be involved in an armed robbery. The other two guys were farmers, and who knows what kind of rough-and-tumble guys are attracted to farming. But Colton was a new executive at the pizza ranch, had worked his way up from service work through management to the position of setting up stores and rehabbing failing ones, but had finally been pulled out of the trenches of the long restaurant hours and brought into the relatively sedate world of corporate headquarters. In fact, on the way to the robbery, we all had to be silent at one point so that Colton could take a call from some branch manager who was having some issues. I remember he told the guy, "If a bad day is any day where you have to do something unexpected, you're not going to have very many good days." All that, and he was still down to go kicking in someone's door. I guess when you have family business to take care of, that takes priority over everything else. Here was the real truth, though. None of us thought that there was really much chance that we were going to get into a shootout. I figured we were going to catch one lonesome motherfucker with his dick in his hand and soon to be shit in his pants when he found himself looking down the barrels of all those guns. The question was just going to be how badly we decided to rough him up for raping this woman. If anything, maybe we'd find some guys playing video games or whatever else, and if they had their pistols within reach, then they better be able to grab them quick if they wanted to have a shootout. We just had to make sure we were quick going in through the door and got the drop on them. What I didn't expect was the all-out clusterfuck that ensued. It's amazing that no one on our side got hurt, considering the amount of lead that was flying around. We had a hell of a time finding the place. Ashton had been there during the daytime, and we'd had to take a detour when Darren had to shit from having drank too many Red Bulls. Coming from a different direction in the dark, we pulled into the wrong place twice. Both times we were tipped off by barking dogs, which we had been assured wouldn't be an issue at our target location. We were all nervous, but excited. When we finally reached the place, we parked in the driveway. It was quite long, and there was plenty of room to park and still keep a good distance from the house. Aston, Spence, and Darren took up position at the front door while they waited for us to run around to the back of the house. There were faint sounds of TV coming from the front room. The curtains were closed, though, and we couldn't see what was going on inside. The backyard was filled with stacks of empty Mountain Dew cans. It was all very neat, mind you, as in the cans were packed back into the boxes they'd come in, and the boxes were stacked in an orderly fashion. But it was like this guy was stockpiling for the apocalypse, when currency would be replaced with empty soda cans. There was a clear path to the back door, though, and Colton and I got into position without knocking any over. The back half of the house was dark, and it was difficult to see much of anything. Then we heard the festivities kick off. Aston used a shotgun in an attempt to breach the door. He had some special rounds designed just for this purpose. The problem was that, unbeknownst to us, the stealer had one of those setups where the front door locked at the top and bottom of the door as well as at the knob. Aston shot the doorknob out, or whatever, and then kicked at the door, and the damn thing wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, the dealer didn't have to be too quick thinking to pick up his gun when he saw his doorknob explode inwards. Then there was the mighty thump of the kick intended to send the door swinging open. By this time he had grabbed his gun and was heading for the back door. But Colton and I were in position, if not exactly ready for action. I was reaching my hand through a broken window in the upper door to reach the door lock when the dealer appeared. He popped off a couple of shots at us, which took us by surprise and had us both ducking out of the way, too slow to return fire. But luckily he was shit for aim and the bullets just pinged past us out into the night. I got the door open and ran inside, stuck my shotgun around the corner the dealer had turned, and fired blindly. Apparently he had been waiting for me to appear because I heard the sound of him fleeing up the stairs after I'd fired. By the way, if you've never heard a shotgun fired off inside a house, I would not recommend it. The pistol shot sounded like firecrackers compared to the fucking cannon blast of the 12-gauge. My ears were absolutely ringing, and I'm sure Colin's were too. I fired another blast up the stairs just for good measure. Who knew when he was about to pop his head out? Better to have him thinking I might just blast the air out of the upstairs hallway for good measure, whether or not he decided to stick his stupid head in the way. I was keeping an eye on the upstairs hallway, determined not to let that fucker get the drop on me again, when all of a sudden the guys out front got serious about their door breach. By this point, Aston had unloaded 6 rounds into the door and given it another kick, and it still stood bolted to the floor, if much the worse for wear. He took a step to the side and motioned to his brothers. "Fucking blast it!" Darren and Spence stepped forward with their shotguns held at their shoulders and unleashed 6 shots each on that poor door, concentrating on where the hinges were screwed into the walls. It was completely obliterated. From my perspective, I would have thought I was well enough out of the line of fire when they started blasting in through the front door, but they were trying to vaporize the damn thing. I got a splinter stuck in my arm from the shrapnel of the exploding door, despite being around a corner. Must have been a ricochet or something. I was probably lucky I didn't get worse. They came rushing in, amped up and ready for battle. "He's upstairs," I said. As if to confirm this, a handful of bullets came zipping down the stairs, aimed at nothing but the empty space. It was as if he just knew that if he shot downstairs, that was where the enemy was, and he was bound to hit something important. He didn't, but he did remind us that as much fun as we were all having running around firing our guns off, that there were real stakes here as well. But it was fun. It probably helped that I was high, and so inclined not to worry, but I was having a blast. It felt like being in a movie, the way a bad car accident can feel. Just very vivid and surreal-like. "Hey, dipshit!" yelled Aston. You have to imagine his unusually high and effeminate voice. There was no response. He continued, "Yoo-hoo, Mr. Loverboy!" "Fuck you!" the guy finally replied. Aston turned to us, saying out loud enough for his prey to hear, "He's still alive!" A few bullets ricocheted down the hallway above us. It was pretty clear that the guy had holed up in the back bedroom. Aston stepped away from the stairway and into the next room, which had a pool table piled high with boxes, not to mention stacks of boxes around the walls. He fired up through the ceiling towards the back corner of the house, shooting 6 times in rapid succession, fanning the shots out, blasting holes in the floor above. "Loverboy, I'm gonna shoot your fucking balls off!" Aston crept forward, turning back to us to put his finger over his lips and give the shh sign. He was listening for any movement. There wasn't any. And then there was a tiny creak. Aston blasted the area, fired several more shots fanning out from the first. All right, I surrender. There was the sound of movement up above. You surrender, lover boy? I surrender, just don't shoot. Suddenly there was the sound of a thump and a crunch outside. Loverboy had jumped out the window intent on getting away, but he wasn't going far. We hustled outside to find him curled up on the ground in pain, holding an ankle that was already looking like it was swelling up. It was probably broken, or at least very badly sprained. The money's upstairs, please don't shoot. He showed us his hands. He had left the gun upstairs. It was probably out of bullets anyway. Aston looked at his watch. We've been here 1 minute and 15 seconds. We need to be out the door in 2 minutes. He sent Spence and Darren and Colton in to get the money. They had hefty garbage bags for the purpose. Aston took the guy's phone and told me to help him up and get him inside. Aston made a call to 911 using the dealer's phone. He followed us inside as the phone rang. Yes, a man has been shot. Loverboy immediately looked worried at these words. What the fuck, man? Yes, that's correct. Aston pulled the judge from his waistband. Shot in the dick. He walked up to where I was lowering Loverboy down onto the couch. What the fuck, man? I'm a prisoner, man. By this time, Aston had hung up the phone. You're a rapist, and I'm gonna fucking castrate you. Please, man, seriously, man, I'm begging you. You're not gonna cooperate, are you? Aston was unmoved. He had been removing the remaining rounds from his 12-gauge and was loading in a different set of shells. Beanbag rounds. Seriously, man, I didn't... He was cut off by Aston blasting him in the stomach with the first beanbag round. Loverboy gasped in pain, began moaning, curling into a fetal position, holding his midsection. Aston walked around him, getting into position, shot him in the ass with the second beanbag. Loverboy jerked in pain at the shot. Aston fired again, this time into the small of his target's back. Loverboy writhed on the ground. He seemed to be hyperventilating. Definite panic. Aston aimed the fourth shot at Loverboy's head, pulled the trigger. He knew better than to hit him directly in the head. A beanbag round can be lethal if you take a square shot to the dome. Instead, Aston sort of skipped it off the top of his head, putting a hole in the drywall with a ricochet beanbag. Those things are serious shit. Loverboy was out cold. Aston checked his pulse. Still breathing, he said. Are you seriously going to shoot his balls off? I asked. Too much? He asked. I don't know, man, he's a fucking rapist and all, but his fucking balls, you already fucked him up with the beanbags. How about a compromise? Asked Aston. What, like you shoot one nut off? Your aim's that good? Aston informed me that beanbags weren't the only less lethal rounds he carried. He also had some shells packed with rock salt, chambered for his .410 pistol. We decided that this was a happy medium. Maybe he'd be castrated, maybe not. He'd definitely be in a lot of pain and think seriously before abusing a woman ever again. Aston didn't hesitate, took aim. The judge cracked out. It was a powerful blast, but his aim held true. The rock salt at such close range shredded Loverboy's crotch. Good riddance. If he had to pee through a tube for the rest of his life, it was just as well.